Welcome back to the Deep Dive.
Yes, hello.
Today we're diving into the work of a thinker who's had a lasting impact on philosophy, Abuna Al-Farabi.
A fascinating figure, often referred to as the second master, second only to Aristotle, really.
High praise indeed.
He was born around 870 CE and died in 951 CE in Damascus.
Okay.
And while there's some debate about his ethnic background, some say Turkish, others Persian,
Right.
his influence on philosophy is undeniable.
And it's not just logic and philosophy, right? He was also a serious scholar of music. His Great Book of Music is an incredible work. It's not just, a technical manual. It's deeply philosophical, too.
Absolutely. He really explored the nature of sound, perception, harmony. A brilliant mind.
So to really understand this second master, we're going to look at his enumeration of the sciences, which is basically his map of all knowledge.
Precisely. It's like his attempt to organize and categorize all the different branches of knowledge.
And I understand there isn't a full English translation yet.
That's right. But recent scholarship, especially French and German translations, has shed light on its structure and content, so we can use those to guide us.
Great. So where does he begin? What's the first science in his system?
You might be surprised to hear this, but Al-Farabi starts with language.
Really? Before even logic?
Yes, he considers language the foundation for everything else. His book of letters or particles is essential reading here.
Interesting.
And thankfully, we have a brand new edition this year, 2024, with a complete English translation by Charles Butterworth.
Oh, wow. So this is fresh scholarship.
Yes, it builds on the work of Muhsin Mahdi, who published an earlier edition.
Fantastic. So what's so important about language for Al-Farabi?
Yeah.
What would a philosopher find interesting in his theory of language?
Well, Nadja German makes a compelling case for the sophisticated relationship Al-Farabi saw between language and logic. He doesn't see them as separate things. For Al-Farabi, language actually shapes how we think, the categories we use, even the way we reason.
So language is like a framework for thought. And you mentioned earlier that there's a connection to music as well. How does music fit into this?
Right. So in the Great Book of Music, Al-Farabi talks about how music can enhance speech, especially in poetry.
I see.
He delves into how musical elements like rhythm and melody can be used to emphasize the meaning and emotional impact of words. It's actually a fascinating area. Azza Abdelhamid Madian's dissertation has an English translation of this section.
Very interesting. Okay, so language is the foundation. What comes next in his enumeration?
After language, we get to what you might expect, logic.
Okay, finally.
He considered logic absolutely fundamental for clear thinking and acquiring knowledge. But piecing together his complete system of logic has been tricky.
In what way?
Well, for a long time, many of his logical writings were scattered.
I see.
Thankfully, we have collections like Al-Mantiq Inda Al-Farabi and a more complete one by Muhammad Taqi Danish Pazu. And then you have scholars like Shukri B. Abed and Joe Plamir who have really done amazing work on Al-Farabi's logic.
And there are translations now too, right?
Yes, more and more. We have Al-Farabi's Book of Dialectic, for example, and Al-Farabi, Syllogism. So his work is becoming much more accessible.
That's great. So for Al-Farabi, what's the purpose of logic? Is it just about syllogisms and rules?
Oh, it goes much deeper than that. He connects logic to ethics and even metaphysics. Nadja German has this great point that Al-Farabi considered logic to be the path to happiness.
Logic is the path to happiness. That's intriguing.
Yes. For him, logic was about living a virtuous life, using reason to make good choices, and ultimately achieving intellectual fulfillment.
That's quite a broad view of logic. Are there any specific topics within logic that he explores that might be especially relevant to modern philosophy?
Absolutely. One that comes to mind is his discussion of future contingents.
Future contingents.
This is about whether statements about the future, things that haven't happened yet, are already true or false. Like if I say there will be a sea battle tomorrow, is that statement already true or false today, even though the battle hasn't happened?
Oh, I see. That's a tricky one.
It is. And Al-Farabi gets into the implications for free will and even divine foreknowledge. Peter Adamson has done some great work on this aspect of Al-Farabi's thought.
Fascinating. Now, I also know that Islamic philosophers in this period group subjects under logic that we might consider separate disciplines today.
Yes, that's right. They followed the Alexandrian tradition. So things like rhetoric, the art of persuasion, and poetics, the study of effective speech, were all considered part of logic.
Interesting. So it was a much broader category than we might think.
Exactly. And Al-Farabi wrote on these topics as well. We have translations and studies by scholars like Ezaher, Werther, Diebler, Van Gelder and Hammond, and Clavin.
So he saw these arts of persuasion and communication as part of the broader project of logic and reason.
Exactly. Now, it's important to remember that while Al-Farabi had huge respect for Aristotle's theory of demonstrative science and tried to fit all theoretical disciplines into the Aristotelian framework of demonstrative, dialectical, and rhetorical poetical discourse, he also recognized that some fields, especially music, rely on empirical observation as well. Miriam Galston emphasizes this point.
Right, so he wasn't just rigidly applying Aristotle's system. He was willing to adapt it where necessary. So what's the next step in his enumeration? Where do we go from logic?
Next up is mathematics, and this includes music, by the way. He lists arithmetic, geometry, optics, astronomy, music, the science of weights, and mechanics.
Wow, a wide range of fields.
He was a true polymath. And it's only recently that scholars have begun to appreciate the depth of his contributions in these areas.
What kind of new discoveries are we talking about?
Well, for instance, Gad Freudenthal has done some fascinating work on Al-Farabi's philosophy of geometry. And Daniel Janos has completely revised our understanding of his astronomy and cosmology. For a long time, people just focused on his rejection of astrology, which Sarah Abram also translated. But Janos has shown how sophisticated his cosmology really was. There's even a newly discovered commentary on Ptolemy's Almagest attributed to him, thanks to Johannes Tolman's work.
It sounds like there's a lot more to Al-Farabi's scientific thought than we previously realized. Now, you mentioned music being part of mathematics. That's a connection that might not be immediately obvious to us today.
True, but for Al-Farabi, there's a clear link. In his great book of music, he explains that music does rely on mathematical principles, things like ratios and proportions.
Okay.
But he also understood that music is not just about abstract math. He emphasized the importance of actually listening to music, the empirical experience of sound.
Right, the lived reality of music.
Exactly. He knew that, for example, the way we hear a semitone doesn't perfectly match the mathematical ratios.
So there's this tension between the mathematical theory and the actual experience of music.
Right. And while we only have a complete translation of the Great Book of Music in French by Rodolphe d'Erlanger, we do have partial translations in English, like George Dimitri Salwa's work on rhythm, and a full translation is on the way by Alison Lewine. She also has some great scholarship on Al-Farabi's idea of music theory as a universal science. It's also worth mentioning that he wrote other works on rhythm and even invented a musical notation system, as Fadlu Shahadi has shown. And Trézan Duarte's work is very helpful for understanding how Al-Farabi saw music as connected to other fields like language, logic, and even politics.
It sounds like music was woven into his whole philosophical system. So after mathematics and music, what comes next in the enumeration?
After mathematics comes physics, but in the broader sense is natural philosophy, the study of the natural world.
Okay.
Compared to his writings on logic and metaphysics, we have fewer texts specifically on physics. Paul Leddink and Damian Janos have written on this, and Marwan Rash has tried to reconstruct a lost treatise on change.
Interesting. Are there any specific insights from his physics that stand out?
Definitely. There's a short treatise where he argues against the existence of a vacuum. It's based on empirical reasoning. Lugal and Saili have published it with an English translation.
Oh, so he was engaging with empirical evidence.
Absolutely. And then there's his refutation of Galen's critique of Aristotle's views on human organs. It's a fascinating work, unfortunately not translated yet. Scholars like Badi al-Fakak and Jadath Jadur have pointed out how he connects the hierarchy of organs in the body to the structure of the cosmos and even the ideal state.
Wow, that's really connecting different areas of knowledge. And of course, the study of the soul falls under physics for Aristotle. What does Al-Farabi have to say about that?
He wrote a very influential treatise called On Intellect. And luckily, we have a full English translation now by McGinnis and Reisman, as well as excellent studies by Philippe Vallat and Jadath Jabour.
Great. So what's so important about this treatise?
Well, for Al-Farabi, the intellect is this key concept that connects logic, ethics, cosmology, and metaphysics. There's been a lot of debate about how he thought we acquire universal concepts, whether it's through emanation from the active intellect or abstraction from experience. Richard Taylor argued for abstraction, and Vallat has a more nuanced view that incorporates elements of both.
It sounds like the intellect is a crucial concept for him. Okay, moving on, the next big area is metaphysics. That's the top of the philosophical hierarchy. What does Al-Farabi say about it?
Metaphysics is a complex area in Al-Farabi. There's a lot of scholarly debate. But his treatise, The Aims of Aristotle's Metaphysics, is a good place to start.
Right.
In it, he argues that metaphysics isn't primarily about theology or revealed religion. Instead, it's about the most fundamental concepts that apply to all beings, existence, unity, those sorts of things.
So it's very much an Aristotelian approach, focused on being.
Yes, in that treatise. And his shorter work on One in Unity, edited and studied by scholars like Mahdi, Janos, Volat, and Martini Bonadeo and his team, further explores these foundational concepts. Also, Stephen Menn has shown how the Book of Letters has important metaphysical implications, raising questions about the relationship between logic and metaphysics, which is something Therese Andruart and Crystal Trago have also written about.
Okay, so we have this Aristotelian focus on being, but then there are his famous political works like The Opinions of the People of the Perfect City and The Political Regime, which start with Neoplatonic emanation. How do we reconcile these seemingly different metaphysical approaches?
That is a big question in Farabian scholarship. There's a lot of debate about it. These political works edited by Walzer and Nadjar and translated by Charles Butterworth do begin with a Neoplatonic metaphysics of emanation, which then forms the basis for his ideal state. They don't prioritize being and unity in the same way as his treatise on Aristotle's metaphysics. Some scholars, like Butterworth and Volat, suggest that the Neoplatonic emanation might be a kind of rhetorical strategy.
A way to make his ideas more acceptable to the religious authorities of his time.
Possibly. But other scholars, like Gutas, Menn, Druart, and Rudolph, argue that Neoplatonism is genuinely important for Al-Farabi's philosophy.
So there's no easy answer. It's an ongoing discussion.
Exactly.
Finally, we arrive at the last category in his enumeration, ethics and politics.
Yes, and it's interesting that Al-Farabi's direct engagement with ethics is somewhat limited in his surviving works. We know he wrote a commentary on the Nicomachean Ethics, but it's lost.
Oh, that's a shame.
It is. But later philosophers like Ibn Bajjah, Ibn Tufayl, and Averroes mention it, and they suggest that it contains some pretty radical views.
Like what?
Well, apparently he denied the immortality of the individual soul and the possibility of a conjunction with the active intellect.
Wow, that's quite different from what we've seen so far.
It is. Shea Marinaria has even found some newly discovered quotes from the Lost Commentary, which makes things even more interesting.
So this lost commentary might have contained a more esoteric or controversial ethical stance?
That's definitely possible. Now, we do have his attainment of happiness, which Marwan Rashed has used to reconstruct some of his ethical views.
Okay.
And there's a shorter work, Directing Attention to the Way of Happiness, Tanpi, translated by McGinnis and Reisman. It's more of an introduction to philosophy and emphasizes things like controlling passions and studying logic. But as Dan Matillas has pointed out, we don't really have a fully developed ethical system from Al-Farabi in his extant writings.
So his main focus, at least in what we have, seems to be political philosophy.
Yes, that's where he really shines. His political philosophy is incredibly rich and influential. And his enumeration actually includes kalam and fiqh as part of political science, which is fascinating. We're lucky to have many English translations of his key political works, mostly thanks to Mohsin Mahdi and Charles Butterworth. What's interesting is that he draws more inspiration from Plato's Republican Laws than from Aristotle's Politics.
That is interesting, especially since complete Arabic translations of Plato weren't necessarily available to him.
Right. And we even have Al-Farabi's own summary of Plato's Laws, edited by Druart and translated by Butterworth. Reisman also discovered an Arabic passage from the Republic, but as Dimitri Gutas points out, it's still unclear exactly which sources he was using.
So he was adapting Plato to his own context. How did he transform these ideas?
Well, he envisions a vast, multicultural and multi-religious empire, ruled by a philosopher-prophet, which is quite different from Plato's city-state. Alexander Orwin has written extensively about this. There's also a lot of debate about his summary of Plato's Laws and whether it's maybe a rhetorical exercise, as Perrin suggests. And then there's the whole question of the authenticity, of the harmonization of the opinions of the two sages.
Right, there's that debate too.
Marwan Rashed doubts its authenticity, while Martini Bonadeo argues that it is authentic. It really complicates our understanding of how Al-Farabi reconciled Aristotelian and Neoplatonic ideas, which is something Peter Adamson discusses in relation to Aristotle's theology and the Arabic Proclus.
It sounds like there's still a lot to unpack about Al-Farabi's political thought. And it's clear from his enumeration of the sciences that he was a truly remarkable thinker. From language and logic to music, physics, metaphysics, ethics, and politics, he really tried to grasp the whole of knowledge.
Absolutely. And while we've made progress in editing and translating his works, there's still much to be done. There are many texts that need critical additions and translations, especially into English.
It's exciting to think that there's still more to discover about Al-Farabi.
Definitely. And his work is incredibly relevant for us today, even though he lived over 1,000 years ago.
Absolutely. And so for our listeners out there who are thinking about Al-Farabi's enumeration of the sciences, here's a question to ponder. In our modern world of information overload and specialization, what can we learn from his attempt to synthesize different fields of knowledge? How can we strive for a more holistic understanding like he did? We encourage you to explore his work and the ongoing scholarly debates around his legacy. There's a wealth of wisdom to be found there.
I completely agree.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the world of Al-Farabi.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
We'll see you next time
Yes, until next time.
for another deep dive.
Into the minds that shaped our world.
Bye for now.
Bye.